When discussing Western civilization, there are a number of elements that must be considered before discussing if it is relevant. First off, there needs to be an understanding if there is indeed a Western civilization. Most of us that live in the West tend to agree that Western culture is what we live in, and that it derives from Western thoughts and ideas. But what is the foundation of those Western ideals? Is it from the Greeks and Romans, or inherited from Northern Europe and Germany? Perhaps it evolved from Christendom and became defined during the Reformation and Renaissance. When looking for an answer to what is Western civilization, we must first look at the ideals that made up our current society and see if indeed these concepts are part of our civilization. Often, the initial link that creates Western civilization comes from the philosophies and ideas that great Greek and Roman thinkers concluded. While we are not the Greeks or the Romans, we do indeed share cultural ancestry with them. Therefore, their ideas cannot be simply discounted from Western thought. The Greeks debated over the concepts of freedom and liberty. Each of those ideas were challenged, argued, defined, and given definitions. In regards to Western ideas of freedom and liberty, Isaiah Berlin in 1958 lays out the idea of the two concepts of liberty. While Berlin comes to these conclusions while living in Western society, one must also know that again the Greeks and Romans also understood these concepts, thus creating a link in Western thought. While they may have labeled or used slightly differing wording, they are essentially the same ideas. Within the ideas presented by Berlin, both ancient and modern thinkers have discussed the ideas of negative concept of liberty, which under that allows for a man to be free to engage in whatever behavior he deems correct and moral without constraint of other men and government. Classical ideas of liberty determine that mastery of one's desires is what will actually make him free. Also important is the idea of civic virtue in order to ensure a government that does not turn tyrannical on its people. With virtue comes honest government that disdains corruption and undue tyranny. Classic virtue and liberty argued by Plato and Aristotle are found in the ideas of Locke and in the founding documents of America. While Aristotle does not link religion to his ideas, Locke and the American founders do. They understand that freedom and liberty is linked to virtue, and that without virtue one stands to lose both. This is an argument that is debated today, with liberals seeking individual autonomy of choice of what they deem is right and wrong, and individual truths. Often they are engaged in an aimless liberty or freedom in which they impose their ideas of moral and relative good upon others. On the other philosophical side, adherents to more classical ideas, or more classical liberalism, are arguing for what they consider true liberty, which is linked to overcoming passion and vice. As Burke described it, in order to gain true freedom, we must put moral chains on our desires. As one can see, this can crudely define the modern conservative and liberal mindsets. Western civilization has a foundation that stretches across a vast expanse of time, but one that also occupies a space within that time. To further understand Western civilization, it has to be geographically bound in order to make sense. There are arguments made against Western culture and civilization because Greek and Roman ideas were picked up and studied in the Middle East and in regions of Asia. However, those concepts of liberty and freedom that found safe harbor in Islamic libraries and schools after the fall of Greece never morphed into the ideas and concepts that have shaped the people of Europe and, more importantly, America. Most importantly, though, is the linking of the Greek and Roman thought with that of Christian thought. When one thinks of virtuous freedom or classical liberty, it finds a natural home with the teachings of Christianity. Seeking to control one's passions while maintaining virtues are often hallmarks of Western Christian thinking. This is even more prevalent when the Reformation starts and the ideas of salvation and seeking to abstain from sin, as sin leads to slavery of one's soul. Only when one can bridle their passions and come unto Christ can they find true freedom. Ultimately, when trying to determine if the concept of Western culture is relevant for today, the answer is yes. As the culture of the West is ever further reaching, And with varied cultures coming in contact and living in the geographically established areas that house Western civilization, it is important for immigrants to learn about the ideas and concepts of liberty and freedom that have been discussed. Furthermore, the West is currently locked in a battle of ideas between those who promote the concept of negative liberty or liberalism and those who are connected with the classical ideas and views of liberty. The view of virtuous freedom is often tied with Christian religious ideas. Eventually, this will descend into a battle of cultural ideas, with one side eventually becoming the standard bearer of what is Western thought and civilization. While the topic of Western civilization is broadly covered in this video, it is a starting point to better understand the starting points and evolution of thought that make up the West.